ready to go then?
Ready to go. Yeah.
Okay. So nice small audience, so feel free to ask any questions at any time. That way you get the most out of it. So I'm going to be talking about a topic people are crazy about at the moment, Copilot. Obviously, Microsoft want to sell Copilot to everyone, and there's a lot of hype around Gen AI as well. And I think from an IT perspective, we're a little bit concerned about sort of our data, really. I think Microsoft 365 has been a bit of a dumping ground. It's unstructured data, and there's those risks of sensitive data being discovered. So we'll talk just a little bit about that and really how you can maintain it. So just a bit about me. So I'm Nikki Chappell. I work for Cloudway. I'm a principal cloud architect there, and I specialise in Microsoft 365 governance, risk and compliance. It's all about balancing that need between user productivity and IT security, and trying to kind of get the two teams to work together in the most efficient and effective way. I'm also a Microsoft MVP in Microsoft 365 and also security, which is the purview side of security. I do a podcast, all things M365. So I've got lots of episodes there covering the whole kind of purview and kind of Microsoft 365 governance. And I write blogs at nikkichappell.com. So there's the QR code there. If you want to reach out to me, please do. So the agenda, we're going to talk about, are you worried about Copilot? I've got it still round the wrong way. It's another thing Microsoft like, isn't it? To change the names. It's now back to Microsoft 365 Copilot. So that's the one that searches your data inside Microsoft 365 rather than the one in Edge. So the question we're always being asked is our data ready for Copilot? And then actually, what are some of the pragmatic steps we can do as people in IT to kind of govern our workspaces and secure our data? And again, Microsoft like to say, oh, it's really easy, you can automatically classify all your data. But obviously the products that they're pushing are the high-end products. So what can we do if maybe we're only on Business Premium or E3 licenses? So let's jump straight in. The first question is kind of, are you worried about Copilot? And this is where kind of that whole issue stems from. Employees want AI at work, and they're not going to wait for their organization to catch up. There's been so much hype about how, you can be more efficient and more effective and have better quality work and free up all of this time to do better things. So everybody kind of wants to it's like a gold rush, isn't it? Everybody wants that little bit of gold. And there's so many tools out there. There's hundreds of Gen AI tools that you can copy and paste your data to in the public domain. So I've done some surveys over time at kind of several sessions like this, and when I've been speaking at conferences, and I've done some surveys, and these are the types of things that come back. And most of it, as you can see, all centres around our data. About data leakage, about data governance, data loss, unprotected data and everything. So these are kind of the big risks that are coming out. Yes, there's potentially really good productivity gains where we may, get an advantage over our competitors, but we don't want to be sharing, intellectual property and NDA data with people that shouldn't have access. So just kind of on the group here, does anyone want to have any views on what their organisation's kind of stance is on Copilot? Are they all happy to go? Is IT and security saying no? Anybody want to share their current situation?
If I'm talking for my own organization, Nikki, we do a proof of concept with only a group of 30 people. And before we started to work with Copilot, and we first tackled all the other problems. We implemented information protection, DLP, conditional access, all the things that had to be in place to use it on a safe way.
Mm-hmm.
And when I translate it to the customers I visit, they are struggling with the things you show here on the screen.
Yeah.
But it's going to happen with our data.
Yeah. And then I think when kind of Microsoft 365, I think a lot of people implemented it during COVID. It was one of those things, it was quick. We need to get to the web. We need to be able to continue our business. So it was never really a strategic project. It might have been in their strategic pipeline to move to the cloud, but it ended up being a tactical project. And often it was just switched on and you just had to make do. There was no user adoption, no really thought about the security and everything. You know, the driving need was to continue your business. And then over time, people are beginning to harden it up, but much more, I would say, on the security side. You know, the other pillars of zero trust, you know, your access and your identity and your applications. And data gets left because it's not traditionally within the ownership of the CISO, for example. You know, data belongs to the business. The business don't really know what to do with it. So it just kind of gets left in Microsoft. You know, people lift the lid up of the box and say, oh, that looks a bit scary. I'll put it down and leave it. And I think we've got to a point now where we really need to address it. And this was some stats from the Microsoft and LinkedIn report. So the Work Trend Index. So that should be a clickable link at the bottom to it. And they were saying 75% of people are already using AI at work, and 46% of those were in the last 6 months. Well, 75%, like most companies and that, aren't using Copilot. So, you know, if you're not using Copilot, you have got a risk that 75% of your employees are copying your data and putting it into ChatGPT or their other favorite Gen AI things and using those services to search for the data. And the issue is those public large language models consume every single bit of digital content. So it's all being consumed. They reckon up to 98% of content in the public domain has already been consumed. So every time you put something in these models, it's pulling it into the model and it's learning it. And there's a risk that it could be surfaced out to other people. And that's where kind of some of the risks come in. Now, if we flip hats and look at it from the kind of CISO side of things. So this was another report here, business rewards versus security risks. So 82% of leaders are citing leakage of data. So they obviously think that's considerable risks there. And down at the bottom there, 48% of leaders expect to continue to ban all use of AI in their workplace. So that means all use of corporate AI, but it's really difficult to stop all those third-party models, somebody opening Edge or Google or whatever and just pasting the stuff in. So this is where we've kind of got this dichotomy. The business is saying go and the security is saying no. So I like the idea of that kind of a phased approach, really. Try it out, particularly with your IT and security teams, see what you can find. So I've worked with one company where I described how you could create an app to go and search for your sensitive data. And that's what they've been doing to see what the risks actually are. So first thing we need to do is our data ready? You know, have we done all of that good governance and access controls, etc.? So let's kind of have a look through and see, you can then see where you are really on this kind of scale of maturity. So if most of your data is still stored outside of Microsoft 365, then Copilot's not going to help you because Copilot's scope is Microsoft 365. So it can search your content within OneDrive and SharePoint, but it's not going to be able to see anything outside. So at that point, I wouldn't bother using Copilot at all. Then people start to kind of work ad hoc, and there's still lots of companies where everybody's just working in their OneDrive. They're not really using the collaborative features. And obviously they're still using third-party stores as well. So again, if you're still using third-party stores and that's the kind of important data, you're not really going to get value out of Copilot. Then what we'll do is we're still using third-party data and OneDrive, but then people start to use some SharePoint sites, but it's all ungoverned at this point. You know, you've got this click a team, click a SharePoint site, no particular controls, etc. And again, we're still at risk of all of this ungoverned data being shared. And then this is another one that people are unaware of. People are creating public teams. So when you create a team, it's public or private. If it's public, anyone can join in the organisation. It's self-joining. The SharePoint site behind it is everybody in the organisation, excluding guests. So if you've got public teams, from a Copilot search, whether you're a member of a team or not, you can access all the data. So I had worked with some organisations that wanted to be open and collaborative and created all their teams as private. That means anybody can see and surface any content from those public teams in a Copilot search. Then we have another area, and this is where I talk about the leaky sieve. So even if you kind of manage your team members, the SharePoint site settings might be anybody in the organisation or people in your organisation. There's nothing to stop people just ad hoc sharing files at the file level rather than saying, oh, you know, share and by adding someone into the team. A lot of people just go into the back end, they find their file and they share with whoever they want inside the organisation. And it's really difficult to kind of govern that ad hoc file sharing. You know, we don't know, you know, are your corporate information being shared with a wider audience? Because you look at the team members and say, hey, the right people in the team, but all of the data behind the scenes could have been shared. Then another popular tool that we have or experience is it's better in the cloud, and Microsoft pushed migrate everything in. And due to kind of your time, cost, quality, elements of projects, something normally has to give, and often it's the quality, and people had the best will in the world to tidy up their data and cleanse it, but people have moved and nobody really knew what was in these data. So what they did is they migrated everything in. All 20 years worth of data that were on your file shares now suddenly became SharePoint sites or OneDrives. People migrated them in. And I had one organisation whereby they did a merger and they migrated the whole of one company, 1.6 terabytes worth of data, into a single SharePoint site. So suddenly you've got all of this data coming in and you've lost your quality. You know, if you've got 20 years worth of old, out of date, kind of redundant information, what we call rot information. And then another biggie is looking at your IT team. Depending on how you create your groups, teams and sites, you may be inadvertently adding your IT admins as an owner. Or one organisation I was working with, they actually proactively added IT as an owner of all of these groups and teams and sites in case there were any issues. Now, if that admin account is attached to their user account, and then that user account has been given a Copilot license, well, they're a member of all of the groups, teams and sites across all the organisation. Then those people in IT effectively can see everything in the organisation and can surface it out. You know, bad practice number one is you should never have a user account and an admin account together. You should always have separate admin accounts. And there is no real business need to have IT as an owner of all these groups. So, you know, there's some of the kind of risk areas that I've looked at. Or you may have implemented some good, you know, controls, DLP, you may be governing your data, you may have tidied up all of that old redundant data, etc. And be in a place where, you know, the CISO says, yes, I'm happy to put forward. But I will tell you that I would think 80+% of organisations are not at this point yet of being really well governed. So you'll be kind of somewhere along those lines. So you're not going to be alone in kind of thinking, gosh, I'm not really ready for Copilot. But whether your data's ready or not, we need to do something because people are going to use products outside. So there are some simple things where we can start minimizing those risks of all those yellow spots everywhere of where we're kind of oversharing our sites or oversharing our files. So let's have a look at what we can do. Kind of, I'm calling it ready, set and secure. So we'll go through how we can kind of govern our workspaces and secure your data. So we're looking at workspaces first. So a workspace is a Microsoft team, a Microsoft 365 group, or a SharePoint site. And effectively, all of those have SharePoint sites in the back end. It could also apply to a OneDrive of a user and effectively that's SharePoint. So we're looking at SharePoint sites effectively, but they could have a group or a team in the front of them. So we'd start off with a baseline. We assume to start off with, always good practice is actually we probably haven't got much in the way of formal governance. So we would start like this. So all of these yellow spots here are representing a SharePoint site, but that could also, as I say, be a group or a team as well. So the first thing that Microsoft offer is this restricted SharePoint search. I personally don't recommend it. Is because what you've got to do is you've got to switch off enterprise-wide search across all of your SharePoint sites. And then you proactively add up to 100 sites into enterprise search, and search and Copilot are intrinsically linked. So from an end user's perspective, they would be able to access those sites that you've kind of added into the list. Any frequently visited site, so if you're a member of a team and you're going in there recently, you'll be able to see it in your OneDrive, and any files being shared with you. That would be all you would have access to. So the big blocker here is it's stopping you searching for your content. And most people are never quite sure where their content is. So this is something I really don't recommend at all. And it's also what I call a sticky plaster solution. You know, by putting this in and saying, tick, I'm ready, you're not really ready, you know, because you haven't addressed the root cause. So number one, and this is the simplest thing to do, just go in and have a look. You can go into like the Microsoft 365 Admin Center or the SharePoint Admin Center. SharePoint's often easier because that lists sites that are not group connected and the group connected ones. Have a look at the ones that are all public and check should they be public. So you may have some genuine ones. Often Viva engaged communities are for, you know, wide social collaboration, and it might be your fantasy football league or your Cats Appreciation Society. Well, that's fine if the SharePoint site is everybody in the organization except guests. But if you're doing kind of business work, you may want to change that. Really easy. You can just go in and change them one by one as an admin or as a team owner. Or you can programmatically script them, just loop through all of the locations and then just change the settings. So that's going to hide then a lot of the content from Copilot, because now if you've got a private workspace, you need to be invited in, and the membership is restricted to the people, the team members. So the next one to look at, number 3, is look at using container sensitivity labels. So these are different from file labels, and they control the accesses to the team, such as do I allow group guests, yes or no, external file sharing of the site. What you can also do programmatically is control the file sharing link. So by default, you may have a file sharing link, anybody in the organization, for example. It's set at the SharePoint Admin Center. What you can do with these container labels, it allows you to enable a new configuration. And the default sharing link you can change to people with existing access. So effectively, the team members or your group members, rather than sharing links of anybody in the organization or specific people. Because most people, when they share a link, they click the link and then they just share it to a colleague. And there's no sort of, unless you've got DLP controls or anything, you know, there's nothing that's stopping you. You can just start sharing content outside of your team. Now, you may get warning messages if you try and share it outside, if the SharePoint site blocks external sharing. So, and people don't go into the cog and go in and change all of those settings. So here we can change the default. So when people share, it's existing people. If they need to share it to a wider audience, they've actually proactively got to go in and do something, making people think that they want to share it. So again, that's really easy. I always recommend something really simple. You could just have 2 labels, internal and external. Internal is for restricts the team down to no guests and internal sharing, and external allows guests and allows external sharing. That could be the simplest two labels. And then just configure both of those sharing links to people with existing access. And then once we've done that, we can then ask our team owners to review the membership. We need to make sure that the team and the group and the site owners are accountable. Data belongs to the business. The business should know who should have access. You know, us as IT, if you're in a large organization, say with 40, 50,000 people, no way you're going to know what all the different parts of the businesses are. So we need to empower those owners. If you own the workspace, you're the one that needs to be governing that. So if you haven't got expensive licenses, then it needs just to be an adoption plan. If you've got Entra IDP1 licenses, we could use dynamic groups based on user attributes, i.e. department equals marketing, added to the marketing team. Or if we've got Entra IDP2 licenses, which is part of the E5 security, then you can use something called the Entra ID access reviews to do a proactive access review. But that is like a higher license. So, you know, it's simple enough just to run a campaign once a year, once a quarter, just to say, hey, go through and check who should be there. Then we can start looking at private and shared channels. So again, this is really building on the team owner's responsibility to understand what the benefits of private and shared channels are. So you may have a scenario where you've got a large team and you may have like 50 people in your team, and you may have like some managers. So, and then you've got their direct reports in this team. You may want to use a private channel for your manager's communication. So then that's restricted to a smaller group of people. You may want to use shared channels so that you can collaborate across the organization. So, for example, if marketing and sales have their own teams, but they're working on a project together, then you might want to create a shared channel, because that's going to create a separate SharePoint site and then collaborate on that, rather than inviting everybody from sales into the marketing team or everyone from marketing into the sales team. Suddenly you're starting to overshare. So it's looking at those appropriate levels of access. Who needs to have access to these areas? So with both private and shared channels, it will be creating a separate SharePoint site behind the scenes, and they will have different permissions than your SharePoint site. So you can see here, we can either lock it down by saying, make it private, only a subset of the organization will have it, or we can open it up a bit and say, let's create a shared channel to share just the information we need to other people in the organization, or shared channels that could be outside of the organization as well. So next, it's a case of, well, we've got a lot of stuff in Microsoft 365, and so many organizations I'm working with are saying, I've run out of space. So, you know, we create all of these things, but what happens when the project finishes, or, you know, whatever the purpose is, you've created those teams. Nobody is willing to press that big red button, delete. There might be something in there that we need to keep. So you just keep everything. So we really need to consider this with Copilot, because it's not only the risk of oversharing our data and Copilot surfacing content that's you know, secret, NDA, intellectual property, etc., employee information. We also have the risk is that Copilot is going to return out of date information. For example, if you put in a query and you wanted to know, you know, what the benefits were for HR, or give me the latest, or give me the NDA template, because you wanted to get a company to sign an NDA. Well, if you've got lots of versions of these documents, then how does Copilot know which is the authoritative version? Copilot can't reason over metadata. So even if you've got an amazing SharePoint information architecture with all of these metadata fields and everything in there, content types, refinable strings, etc., Copilot cannot see that data. So what it'll do is, if you're saying, you know, I want to create an NDA document, find me a template, it's going to search all the information you need. Well, you might have 20 years worth of information because you might have migrated everything from your on-premise in there, and you legitimately may have access. So you might have done all of the other controls. So you've got nicely, tightly governed groups, but you've got access. Another area that can be a bit of an issue is if you are actually using retention or records labels, because you need to keep that stuff. You need to keep all of those bits of information. If you've got access, then, you know, that's not maybe up to date information, but you need to keep it as a record. So using retention labels and things is fine, but you need to consider, do you still need to have access to that site if it's inactive data? So if you're not willing to delete the information, if you're not willing to put retention policies to say keep for 7 years and delete, unless it's got a proactive label on it, then at least hide the site. So what I mean by that is go through your tenant, look at all of those inactive sites and say, do all of those people really need to be in there? And start removing people from it. Now, if they do need to get access, then you need to have some workflow for people to come in. So yes, they may need to search that data, but you've probably got a lot of data there that nobody is really looking at. And if people are still members, then they can still access that. I think kind of examples show that potentially 75% of our data in Microsoft 365, something along that lines, or more, is inactive, and it may be out of date information. So you'd need to kind of go through and tidy that up, even if you're not pressing that button to delete it, at least hide it. You can also hide it from search as well if you wanted to, so you could keep the members and hide it from search. So that's some simple, pragmatic things that you can implement really quite quickly without the need of saying, well, what type of data is this? So you can put some controls on to at least minimize the risk of oversharing. Then if you want to spend some money, Microsoft have got some really good features coming out. Most of this is about SharePoint Advance management. It's $3 per user, and you need to license all users in your tenant. But like some really, really fantastic things that are coming out. So this is one of my favorite features, and I'm a bit annoyed. I think that it's part of an advanced management product and they want more money for it. But what you can effectively do is stop the leaky sieve. So before, even if you're governing the members, there's nothing to stop somebody from the SharePoint site doing file share, and even if it's has the default sharing link, they can go into the settings and say, I want to share with everyone in the organization or specific people, for example. This control here, and you have to enable it for your tenant, and then you enable it for each group or each non-group connected site. And what you're doing is you're blocking the SharePoint site membership, and you're restricting it to only people in a group. So for groups and teams, it's really easy. All you've got to do in the SharePoint Admin Center is tick a box, and it will say, I'm going to use my team group membership is going to be the same membership of my site. So it means you cannot share outside of those group of people. Anything that's historically been shared with people outside of the groups, those links will no longer work. So it's a fantastic way of really quickly locking down. For SharePoint sites, it doesn't have a group associated with it. So you've either got to create a group or a security group to associate it with. But this is the fastest way to stop that leaky sieve situation. Just say, actually, if you're a member, you get access. If you're not a member, you don't get access. New feature coming out November, so that's next month. And this is going to be really exciting. So what we can do is we've got this restricted content discoverability. Whereas the one right at the beginning that I didn't recommend, that was where you had to go in and say, I want to pick up to 100 sites that I want available for search and Copilot. This is sort of doing it the other way around. So what you can do here is you can select sites where you want to kind of restrict discoverability. And what it will do is it's going to be quite clever. It's going to stop tenant-wide search. So if I just go across the tenant and search generally, it will stop that and it will stop Copilot. But effectively, it's not going to stop local searches. So if I'm within the site and say, where's the file in my 5,000 files, etc., in my site or my team. So if you're a member and you'll have the local capabilities, but what it will stop is the tenant-wide search and the tenant-wide Copilot. So this is really exciting. I've just got onto the preview program and I'm hopefully going to be testing this out at the weekend. And another thing that you can look at, again, it's an advanced feature, is Microsoft 365 Archive. So this is the capability whereby you will move your SharePoint site data, your inactive data, into Archive. Two benefits for this. One is currently the data is not searchable, therefore Copilot does not have access. So that's one benefit. Benefit number two is that if you're using any of the purview features, such as e-discovery or retention or sensitivity label, all of that is still honoured because it's still within your Microsoft ecosystem. So Copilot can't find it. Any of the good governance you've put in place will work. And actually, the third benefit is you're freeing up some of your hot storage as well. For your active data. Lots of companies I know have run out of space and they're having to pay more money for it. So how pricing works is it's per gigabyte, and Archive plus SharePoint storage together are within your SharePoint tenant limits there. So what would happen is if you've got, I don't know, say 10 terabytes worth of storage allowance and you've used up 5 terabytes. If you've moved 3 over to Archive, you've got 3 terabytes in your SharePoint and 2 terabytes in Archive. You've still used combined 5 terabytes worth of data. So you don't start having consumption costs for Microsoft 365 Archive while you're within this limits. If you've hit that 100% boundary, rather than going out and buying expensive SharePoint, it's probably cheaper to move it to Archive. At the moment, there are some downsides. At the moment, it's on a total site level. So we have to archive a whole site. We can't archive and move off files. It's going to, currently, there is no user search. So this is fine for totally cold data that nobody knows what to do with, just hide it effectively. You're pushing it here. If people do need access, then you can't just restore a file. So this will impact end users, and it also impact if you're doing things like e-discovery searches. The data's there, but if you want to actually view the content, you would have to restore the whole site, and that costs you money. Microsoft have got a calculator, and I think it works out that if you restore the site more than 4 times in a year, it's actually cheaper to retain it in SharePoint. So something definitely worth considering for your, out of date data. Because, if it's needed for a particular purpose or you don't know what's in there, then, let's move it out somewhere else and then Copilot can't see it. Now, you could consider other products as well. There's third-party products that do archiving and, again, moving stuff out. So this is potentially useful for where you migrated your content in from those file shares and it's just sat there and nobody's looked at it since. Just kind of move it out to cold storage. Again, that's an example there. So that it's kind of the steps really to look at how we can govern our workspaces. So this, I'd say, is the easier part. You have far less workspaces than you do by files. You might have a few hundreds or thousands of workspaces, but you're likely to have tens of thousands or millions of files. So focus on those workspaces first, control the access to ensure only the right people have the right access. Then we can look at the files. This is always hard because the data is owned by the business, and you know who's going to define the rules, how are you going to tag your content, etc. So the first thing is if you do have sensitivity labels, even if they're manually applied by the users, and you might have one called sensitive or strict confidential, etc. When you use Copilot, if it is referencing some content, a file that's got a strictly confidential label, it might not even have any data security permissions on it, so it might not use encryption or things like that. Copilot will automatically inherit that sensitivity label. So you might be genuinely working on content and it's got NDA and it's got strictly confidential, and you create a new Word document, and if you're using that as a source, then the file is automatically labeled as that. So that's quite good. Obviously, once the content is labeled, then you know you've got things like DLP controls will pick up the condition of contains sensitivity label strictly confidential. So that is something you can create a set of labels and allow users to, at least going forward, every time they open up edit files, you know, get them to tag it. Copilot will use the highest label from the content it's using. Then if we want to put kind of data security controls with our labels, then we can use encryption. And there's different levels of encryption. By default, you get the like the co-author role, so you can collaborate and edit, but you can have different roles. You can give people viewer roles or full ownership roles, etc. So this way, if you've restricted it down to only people in HR have got co-author access to these employee records, for example, and if that file is inadvertently put on a SharePoint site where it's like everybody in the organization or has been emailed around to the organization, then you're really mitigating that risk of oversharing, because you put encryption controls to say you need to be a member of a particular HR group, for example, to open it. So the file is technically sitting somewhere it shouldn't, but it can't be opened. Copilot, when it comes to encryption, will work with the access that you have. So if you don't have access, Copilot doesn't have access. So that's one thing to do. So I always think about the pyramid of your data. Focus on the most sensitive data first, and at least lock that down to the relevant people. Then we can start looking at tailoring the permissions within encryption. Copilot needs two things. It needs extract rights and it needs view rights. They're the two roles it needs to be able to see. So by default, if you've got the co-author role with encryption, that does give you extract and view rights, which means Copilot will see it. If you changed it to something like a viewer role, so you've got a group of people that can collaborate on it, but if some people you only want to give them view only, or you can create some custom roles as well, the reviewer role, or you can create your own bespoke ones. If it doesn't have that extract usage right, then it can't extract the data out to analyze it. So it still allows you some access to the content, but you can access it. You might not be able to collaborate on it. Copilot can't see it as well. So that can be an important thing. So there's another functionality that came out, I think, about a month ago, whereby we can also use sensitivity labels to block content being accessed by search services. So this will stop it being analysed by Copilot and some of the search functionality as well. This has to be managed in PowerShell. So once you've created your labels, you then have to update them. You can't do it in the Purview Admin Center. And this will stop content inspection services. However, there are some caveats to it. This is working in your apps, so your Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and Outlook apps, those Office apps. So if you're in there, you wouldn't be able to use Copilot if the content has a particular label. However, if you're just having a Copilot chat within Teams and you say, hey, give me some information on this NDA information or a particular project, even if these files have been labeled, they will be surfaced in those general conversations. So this is controlling it when you're working in, say, the Office apps. Does it impact some other things as well? So it's always worth having a look at those controls to see whether they are suitable for you. Another thing that did appear that vanished again quite quickly after it appeared, so hopefully it will reappear soon, is the ability to expire sharing links. So at the moment, the only way you can expire links is if you're using the anyone sharing. So that's unauthenticated sharing links. So in the SharePoint Admin Center, if you've chosen to use that one, you can say, do you want these links to expire and how long do you want, or when do you want them to expire? So you can say, well, I'll give somebody access for a day or a week or 2 weeks. Suddenly, the expire links appeared for specific people and company-wide links. And so there was the option when you were doing to share to actually say, actually, I want to share with a colleague in the organisation, but I want that link to expire after 1 week, for example. So giving people time-bound access. However, that seemed to have vanished. So there must have been some sort of glitch after Microsoft rolled it out because they've withdrawn it. So I'm expecting that to come soon. The little time it was out, I couldn't see any particular controls in the admin center to set a default expire after, company-wide links after 1 week, etc. It was down to the end user to proactively go in there and set a sharing expiration. Risk is with it, users doing it, and they won't bother. They'll just go click share and just share the link.
Yeah, I hope it will be available in the admin center so we can control it for the whole organization.
Yeah, it would make sense because it's there for the anyone links and the user can go in and adjust it. So it just seems a bit daft that you're allowing people to expire links, yet the default is not to expire them. It should be, you should be able to have control. So hopefully that will kind of return soon. So I should have tagged that to say it's been withdrawn. So that's the kind of the data side. It is harder to do, and most organizations haven't got E5 compliance. They're not going to be able to automatically scan the content. So the best you can do is kind of work forward. Every time you open an existing document or create a new document, you're labeling them. So that's more your active data. So it's still worth doing. Microsoft have a set of recommended labels that you can use as well. But this is not all about the technical controls. I kind of mentioned it earlier with this stuff. A lot of the responsibility, lies with the people that own the data as well. So we need to think about who should be responsible for what. So I've kind of got 4 different groups of people here. You've got your management, your senior leadership team. They should be defining your governance and AI policies and the rules and what are the sensitive data labels, and try and have those policies and rules of what can be shared outside. Do you need DLP controls, etc. And they'll come up with that kind of strategic ways of working. Now, obviously, that will include some of the IT people as well. We've got our workspace owners, groups, teams, and sites. they're responsible, it's their data, they're responsible for who should have access and should be governing that. And then, you know, maybe they're the ones that should be recommending particular labels. If you've got E5 compliance, you can put default labels on document libraries, for example. So you could go in there and put a default label. So all content is labeled. We also need to consider all organizations because, you know, data is everybody's business. Everybody needs to know how to work efficiently and effectively. People need to know how to understand what is sensitive data and how to put the labels and everything on it as well. So that's kind of a key thing. So a lot of people come into the organization and there may be sensitivity labels there and they may be applying a default label. But if nobody really knows that that button is there and what all of these labels mean, then you know, it's not going to be used correctly. The other thing is, you know, when we're moving into sort of IT and the technical controls, is don't have too many labels. And if people don't know what the difference between confidential and strictly confidential is, then, you know, which is the one that they're going to use. If you've got a big long list, they're just going to pick the one at the top. So IT are responsible for implementing those technical controls, but they're not responsible for defining the rules. That's the senior leadership team should be defining what the policies and the rules are for this, because it's not just IT's responsibility, but IT will implement those. And often that's the easy part of it. Their responsibility then for linking up things like the DLP controls with all of the security stack, etc. And you can then look at things like Copilot, oversharing, and incident management. What's the process if somebody does find sensitive data? You know, it's not necessarily a malicious act. But you don't want people to be frightened of telling IT and say, hey, I found this data, I found all these employee records, or I found something else that I shouldn't have seen. We need to encourage people to log that and then allow IT to investigate it and then say, well, where was this data stored? How did this person have access to it? So we don't want to make it people think that actually this is immediately going to become an HR matter because you've found sensitive information. We want to make sure that people feed that information in, because once we've identified that risk, then as IT, we can remediate it and then change the settings. So we want transparency across the organisation. So just to finish off, really, I seem to have something not quite right there. There's really 3 steps for kind of ready, set and secure. So once we've identified and baselined where we are, put in that workspace governance. It's easier to be led by the IT. You've got less workspaces, so therefore you can get results quickly rather than waiting 6 months for somebody to come up with a name of labels. You can kind of implement this relatively quickly, get some quick wins. While you're doing that, look at the data security. It's going to take longer. You're going to need, you know, the senior management team to define what the rules are and things, and working with the security teams. And then don't forget the user adoption, because you can put all the technical controls in the world, but Copilot is an assistant. People need to understand that they've got the responsibility to QA that information when it's come back and sense check. Is this from an NDA document that hasn't been labelled, that's come from a team that I shouldn't have access to? Make sure that they're aware that they should be logging instances where they've uncovered sensitive information.
And Nikki, can we say that this is not a one-time thing?
Exactly, yeah. So it is really iterative. So I think I've done some work on the Microsoft 365 maturity model, and I co-wrote part of the governance, risk and compliance model. So definitely it's an iterative approach. So often you'll start off with, you know, at level 100, where we want to try and baseline people, is get them to level 300, but over time grow these activities. But look for the low-hanging fruit first. Things like going out and finding, have you got public teams? Just converting public teams to private teams, which can be done in a day, effectively. You know, by the time you just check and say, oh, these Aviva engaged communities, we'll keep them there, but everything else will switch over. You can write a script for that quite quickly and change it. And immediately you can, you know, use the images that I've created and just say, actually, this was our risk exposure. We had 50% of our groups were public. Now only 5% of them are, and that's a dramatic thing. And then you've got that constant feedback to the management team and to security to say, this is our security stance. So having that pictorial form of starting off with everything is yellow because we don't really know where we are, and then you can kind of start color coding in it and do percentages. We're governing this amount. We accept that we've got so many private teams. We're proactively doing the management. We're proactively putting other controls in place, etc. Yeah,
True.
so it will take time.
Can we also state, if you leave the word Copilot, it's also your basic hygiene that already has to be in place?
Yes, yes. So I've been talking about this since Teams came out. So like talking about 6 years ago. So, you know, I was working in an organization that was doing a lot of Skype for business migrations into Teams, and they were looking at it from the telephony hat and the UC hat on it. And I kept saying, well, you know, if you give them access to Teams, you've opened up that whole of Microsoft 365. So yeah, this is really good governance, good hygiene, things you should be talking about and implementing, even if you don't have the need currently for Copilot. Because there's always the risks of the bad actors in the organization. Insider risk, you know, is it 45%, something like that, of incidents can be insiders. So yeah, good governance, good hygiene is really important for all organizations.
Yeah, I see a lot of customers struggling because they have to do a lot of activities and they don't know where to start. Hey, do I start with information protection? Do I start with security? How do I start to have a good governance on groups? Do I have to start with governance on data? Where to start, Renee?
Yeah, so I've got the order here really is first of all, understand where you are and accept that actually we don't know what's in Microsoft 365. That's a really good way of starting, because you think about when we're planning on a journey. So my analogy is I want to go on a journey, and I might want to, say travel, travel somewhere. I go to Google Maps and I have to put in where I'm going from. So where I'm starting from, and then say where I'm starting, where I'm going. And then you say the mode of transport. Am I going to walk? And it'll say, oh, it's going to take you 10 days. And you think, oh, do I really want to spend 10 days? Do I want to go by public transport? Do I want to drive by a car? And then you could kind of do it. Do I want to get a private jet to take me there, for example? So you've got these different ranges, and you do that with normal journeys. It's the same mindset for this, really. Understand where you are, and it's totally acceptable to say we don't really know where we are. But historically, people would lift the lid up and say, oh, this is scary. I don't know what it is. I'll just put the lid down and hope it goes away. So what I'm saying is, if we go through and take some baby steps first, do that workspace governance. There's far less workspaces, and that's going to take a bit of time. So I've been working with one organization, and I did the assessment this time last year, and we are at the workspace levels. So they've got about 3,000 groups, teams and sites. And we've been going through, planning activity, doing user adoption training, best practices, standardizing the workflow. We're using a third-party tool for the workspace governance. So they're using the orchestra tools, but, there are other applications out there. So we're putting in good governance going forward, and then we're saying, well, what are we doing with all the existing ones? We need to bring them up at the same level. And then in parallel, there's a longer project, say for the data security, and user adoption is woven through it all. So yeah, this is good hygiene, good governance. So does anyone have any questions? Well, hopefully you found the session useful.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, it was not completely in depth. Maybe it would be interesting to clarify some other things about retention labels, retention policies, what are the difference, but that's more in depth maybe for another session in the future.
Yeah. I mean, depending on how much time, there are so many different,
True.
things. So with one company that, I've done 3 3-hour workshops on this, going in, looking at the stuff, because there is a lot more. But when you talk about retention and retention labels, it's even more difficult than this. So when you're looking at that maturity level, let's tackle the low-hanging fruit. And for me, the low-hanging fruits are get the access controls right on the workspaces, and then looking at securing your data, then looking at your data retention side, because nobody is willing to put policies in place to delete. Oh no, we'll retain it forever. We want to keep everything forever, which doesn't help Copilot. So yeah, these are the kind of things that I would tackle first.
It's also I use the same approach, so yeah, I recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from the audience? Or else we're gonna wrap up this session. Oh, I see something in the chat. No, thank you very much. Oh, great.
Well, thank you very much for having me today.
Yeah, you're welcome, Nikki, and thank you. You presented this very useful session to us. And have a good trip to Portugal.
Yeah, I've got my Portuguese lesson now, so yeah, in 2 minutes' time.
Okay, have fun.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Hey, bye-bye.